but it's so hard, right? Not to look at porn. And she'd be like, nope, not for me. I do it every day, right? And I would get so frustrated because I would be like, you don't understand me. A lot of people see recovery, especially from addiction, as like, this is the penance that I get for the wrong that I've done and for the mess I've become. Recovery really should feel like salvation, right? It should feel like I was stuck in a dark pit and someone finally pulled me out.
Hey, this reminds me of the worst experience that I've ever had in my entire life. And your body goes back to that memory and re-experiences it all over again. And that's really, really scary to have those popping up throughout the day for many women multiple times a day.
I am so thankful that this is the life I get to lead now and not the crap that used to consume me and take up my day and my energy and all of my mental thoughts.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Unhooked. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz, and today I'm joined by a truly inspiring couple, Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith. Matthew is a professional certified coach with a background in pastoral leadership, and Joanna is a licensed marriage and family therapist and trauma-informed clinician specializing in betrayal trauma. Together, they bring over 2 decades of combined experience helping couples heal from the impacts of sexual addiction and betrayal. Their work is also deeply personal. They've walked this journey themselves and now support couples navigating the complexities of relational healing. They're also the co-authors of the book Building True Intimacy and the creators of the Intimacy Pyramid, a framework for rebuilding trust, honesty, and connection. In this episode, we dive deep into what it really takes to heal, not just as individuals, but as a couple. Expect to learn the difference between individual recovery and relational healing, how betrayal trauma can mirror PTSD and what that means for partners, common mistakes couples make after discovery and how to avoid them, and how to rebuild trust when your past includes deception and secrecy. Whether you're in a relationship affected by porn addiction or simply want to understand what real intimacy and connection require, this is an episode you don't want to miss. So, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith. So, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Unhooked. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz. Today, super excited to have on Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith. Matthew and Joanna, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Excited to be here.
Great to be here.
Yeah, you guys are my first duo interview guest I've ever had, my first couple. I guess you guys probably get that a lot, that you're probably a first time for a lot of podcasters. Yeah.
Yeah, we tend to go a lot of places together. If we're separate, that's usually more odd. People are like, where's your wife or where's your husband? So this is normal for us, but new for a lot of other folks.
Yeah. Well, so we were connecting just before we hit the record button, and I was letting you guys know that I'm super excited to have you on because there are so many topics that you guys cover in the work that you do around healing after betrayal and helping couples kind of heal from porn addiction and betrayal trauma. And there are so many topics that are good to get into. But I guess for the listeners who aren't familiar with you and your work, could you just give us a sense of who you guys are and what's the work that you do in the world?
Yeah, we've been working professionally with couples for almost a decade now. And we, in our own journey, experienced pornography addiction, sexual addiction, betrayal between the two of us, and that recovery journey. And we didn't necessarily think this would be the field we were going into, but as we went through our own healing process, as we started working with other couples, generally, we started seeing that these cases kept coming to us over and over again.
Yeah.
And we were really passionate about this area of navigating the kind of recovery journey because it's a really tricky space. It's a really delicate space, but there's a lot of couples who want to figure it out. They would love to have something on the other end and something that's hopefully better than was on the backside. And so we've really just enjoyed kind of staying in that space and really making that our focus.
Yeah, and I think, in our own journey and in working with so many people, we realize that healing from sex addiction, porn addiction is very different than healing relationally from the impacts of that when it's present. And so it's really easy to assume, okay, just deal with that. It's gone. Everything's going to be great now. But that is not the case at all. And so when we went through the journey over a decade ago, there were no resources for couples. There was no resources for what does the relational healing look like. And so I think that's part of also what drove our passion to be in this field, in this particular niche, was to bring good, helpful healing resources to couples so they can find their way through that journey.
Oh, that's so beautiful, because I think just as you say it, I'm realizing, so much of the work in this space, the work that I do and a lot of other people, it's really about that first step, which is, addressing kind of, for the man, your own relationship with porn and breaking free from that. But then there is so much work left to be done in terms of healing and rebuilding the relationship.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I go home to that relationship every day, right? So that was what we noticed, right? Like being, as much as I'd love to believe that I can kind of be in recovery in isolation, and some people, right, they do inpatient programs and things like that, but eventually I have to reintegrate my everyday living, which is going to include my family, which is going to include my partner. And that's all happening while I'm in this rebuilding process, while I'm really trying to get a sense of who I am and who I want to be. There's still these relational expectations, right? These relational impacts that are right there in front of me. And there's a process that I think if you do it right, it can work really well. But I think the reality of both of those happening at the same time, kind of being present at the same time, makes it really dicey, really tricky.
Well, we're definitely going to dive into some of that diciness. I'd love to hear just a little bit about your story, the process of discovery, and what was it like for each of you to go through that process? Maybe Matthew, starting with you, and then Joanna, we can pick up with you. What was that like?
Yeah. I mean, addiction for me, I never would think of the word addiction before I realized I was an addict. It was, I knew that pornography was something I did. I knew it went against my value system. It didn't align with who I wanted to be. And so therefore I had a, consistent practice of keeping it very private. I really had no problem leading a double life. And telling people one thing and kind of doing another. And that went on in my life year after year, decade after decade. And when Joanna and I got married, I was kind of in a season where I had set it aside. I felt like, okay, this is, I'm done with this. And so when she asked questions about my past and about pornography, I told her, I used to struggle. That used to kind of be this thing. Did not share with her any of the details, really clouded it all, and tried to kind of move on. And thinking that when we got married, the joy of our relationship, our connection, which was really strong at the time, that would kind of keep me going and really carry me through the rest of my life. And as most addicts, especially those who struggle with pornography, know, like, marriage does not fix it. And in some ways, marriage can even ramp it up. And so it wasn't too long into our relationship that all of a sudden those desires, right, those practices started creeping back in. And now not only was I kind of hiding this from people, kind of really outside, kind of on the periphery of my life, now I had to hide this from someone right there with me all the time. And so I really doubled down on these kind of hiding mechanisms, lying, and all that would do is it started to create this kind of wall between us. And like I said, we had a really good relationship. We really loved each other. We liked who we were. We felt called to work with couples and to kind of, help others with their relationship. But we were finding our relationship wasn't getting any better. Like, our relationship kind of hit this glass ceiling. And Joanna was kind of sensing some things when she had this really crazy experience in one of her classes. I'll let you kind of tell about.
Yeah. So, he kind of alluded to the fact that we were already really passionate about relationship, wanted a healthy relationship. And so we had actually dived in. We were eating up relationship resources because we also realized that we had no framework for how to actually create a healthy relationship. So while we were passionate about it, we found ourselves failing a lot. And so we had dove into some resources, some that really dramatically shifted our relationship and helped us. And through that, I realized I wanted to go in through the master's program in marriage and family therapy and dive into that more. So I'd be better equipped to help other people as well. And so the first class I went to was a 2-week intensive shame and guilt. And this anonymous guy came and shared his story of freedom from sex addiction and what that journey looked like and how he repaired his relationship. And as he's talking about this, my gut is just telling me, this is it. This is the thing that is keeping us from moving forward in the way we want to. And so I went home that day and I just point blank asked him, are you struggling with this in our marriage?
And for the first time, I stopped lying, right? Because I'd gotten that question, never that direct. And she told me this story, right? She was telling me the story of this guy, and I could tell something was coming. I was like, she's not telling me the story for no reason, right? And then she kind of got to this pause, and she just looked at me and was like, is this what's going on? Are you struggling with this? And for the first time, yes, right, came out of my mouth. In my life, right, no one had ever known this that I had ever really ever met or talked about. And so for the first time, yes comes out, and then it was kind of silence. She didn't really say much. She handed me the list of resources that she had written down from this guy's testimony, and she was like, here you go. These are the things I think you'll be doing. And that was really it for a little bit. It didn't become this big explosive thing.
Yep.
It kind of more went quiet because I think we didn't know what to say. I was terrified. I was obviously under the belief that she was leaving, that whatever was going to happen would be her leaving. We would be, we'd be divorced. I'd be kind of on my own. And so I was very surprised when she actually stayed, right? And not only stayed, but really invested in the process of her own healing, and kind of our healing as a relationship. And we kind of took what we had learned in the relational spaces that we had kind of gleaned from, and we just kind of went all in on recovery. I joined a 12-step group. I went to an intensive to really figure out what the underlying issues were, where this really was. I started being honest for the first time. I told my story to some men at my intensive, and I think started having these experiences of kind of coming out of the shadows and kind of out of the darkness that I had in this double life. And really started experiencing kind of the fruit of what recovery brings just in my own life, and was like, knew really right away that, yeah, this is it. I am so thankful that this is the life I get to lead now, and not the crap that used to consume me and take up my day and my energy and all of my mental thoughts. And just the dissonance between my values and actions had really become so difficult to hold. To start to put those things back together was just a huge difference for me.
There's so many questions I want to ask Matthew about kind of how you found your recovery, but I first want to explore Joanna, because from the way you guys just described it, it sounded like it was a very thoughtful, intentional, calm, rational, like, oh, are you struggling with this? Oh, yes, I am. Here's some pamphlets.
Hear you. Yes. If only it was like that.
What was that like from your experience? Was there rage? Like, was there betrayal? I mean, what was your experience?
Yep. There was, it was really interesting because I kind of described, as I was hearing the story in class, I was pretty sure this is it, right? I think there was also a part of me that was deeply hurt and deeply saddened that he had not been honest about that reality and given us a chance, right? It felt like our chance had been stolen away, right? And so there was a lot of pain. And so I think in some ways I was sharing the story, giving him one more chance to step into that himself. I was hoping at some point he would be like, I need to confess something, right? And so I'm talking about it, and we're talking around it. And finally I realized he's not going to do it. He's not going to be honest. He's not going to bring this up himself. And so that's when I was like, okay, I have to ask this question. And so I think even in me asking it, there was some sadness and disappointment that he hadn't chosen to be honest, that he was forced there through my asking of the question. And so then there was also a mixture of relief when he answered yes. And it was just one word. But like I said, or he shared, we had talked about this many times in our relationship, but there was never any ownership. There was never any honesty. It was always something in the past that had been dealt with. And so for the first time, I knew I was getting honesty finally. So I think there was a bit of relief mixed in there as well. Like, okay, well, if he's willing to be honest, there might be a shred of hope, a glimmer of hope for us moving forward. And then there's just the sheer terror of what's behind that yes. Like, I don't know what all is there. And I don't know that I'm ready to hold that. And so I think part of that also, not diving into much there, was just like a personal boundary of like, I need to make sure I'm ready to hold whatever's coming under that yes. And so I didn't ask many more questions at that point.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into that, because I think that's, again, one of the reasons that I think you guys are so unique is this more relational piece. Because there are many people who can come on here and talk about, okay, how do you recover from porn addiction? How do you break free from that habit? But you guys have such a great level of insight into how to work this relational piece. And so, Joanna, I'm curious to know, for women who have a suspicion that their partner has some hidden porn addiction or sex addiction, what advice could you give? What's the best way to go about this process of exploring it?
Yeah, it's, the first thing I would say is trust your gut. It is amazing if you are sensing something, if you're wondering, if you're thinking it might be there. I think 99% of the time there is something there with the partners that I've worked with who have sensed something. And so trusting your gut, I think, is really important. Arming yourself with information can be so helpful and so validating and make it easier to trust your gut. And so that was one of the pieces that was so helpful for me, starting to understand what sexual addiction is, starting to understand even what betrayal trauma is, starting to understand, like, what does it look like in a relationship that has those markers, right? And once you're armed with that information, it's a lot easier to trust your gut. It's a lot easier to advocate for health, advocate for transparency and honesty. I work with so many partners when we're talking about transparency, honesty, boundaries. They ask me, well, am I allowed to ask for that? Right? And so it is so empowering for them to hear, absolutely you are, and you should have been getting that level of honesty all along. Right. And so I think equipping themselves with that information. And the last step would be finding a professional or professionals to kind of help you in that journey. And it might be help you facilitate a conversation with your spouse. If you are sensing something is there that they are hiding, they're not being fully honest, transparent about, it can be really helpful to do some kind of couples work and kind of begin that conversation, trying to figure out what is there. Because even if it's not that, your gut is sensing something. You are not feeling fully safe in the relationship. And so anytime that is the case, we would say, you know what, get some help, get some outside support resources that can help you identify what is the thing that's causing that lack of safety. And then what does the path of healing look like for you?
I know that this topic can trigger so much shame for men, that asking a man point blank, hey, are you struggling with this, can be a huge trigger of defensiveness and shame and wanting, so many men have told me that they thought they would rather lie and kind of take a hit for the team and deal with that lack of integrity rather than hurting the feelings of their partner. That it was almost, they felt like, how could I hurt my partner's feelings? I would rather just lie about it. And so how do you create that safe space for a man to be able to open up?
I mean, I think we approach it a little differently, because this is, when we think about the framework for recovery, honesty actually comes before safety, right? And so, and we talk about that Right. Honesty is what I commit to relationally. And it's interesting because we've worked with so many partners over the years, and they will tell us rarely it is the sexualized behavior that bothers them, that hurts the most. What is the most deepening and troublesome and painful is the willingness to withhold information and therefore take choice away from the partner. Joanna didn't have choices early on in our relationship. She didn't have really an informed and empowered choice when she married me, because she married me under certain circumstances and information that weren't true. Now, I believe that if I'd have given her that information and we have done the work properly, we still could be in a very similar spot relationally today. But I took that choice away from her. And so the recognition is, this is not about my safety, right, versus her. It's recognizing, like, I've taken away all her safety if I'm not willing to be transparent. And so I think that part of it is I always encourage partners when I talk to them about, like, you have a right to tell your partner, your lies hurt me and they are the most damaging thing, right? And I can't choose you, right? If you don't let me, right? And that's what I'll usually, when I'm working with guys, one of the things I will let them know is I say, we're all wanting to feel chosen. We are all wanting to feel accepted. You can never have that when you withhold information from your partner. The thing that you want to feel safe, right? To feel safe in a relationship, we usually want to feel chosen, but I can't have that, right? And so the lie actually keeps me from safety. The reality is, yes, when people know certain things about my behavior, they may choose to distance themselves relationally, but I won't ever really get to know who that is. And that's, I think, the thing that keeps so many people trapped. And so it is recognizing that I choose to be honest in relationships first so that I can get safety in relationships and trust. And that's what we learn in recovery, right? I learned that once I started, the first time I told my story was to a group of men, and I was still terrified, right? I was terrified they would judge me. I was terrified that I did something weird that they didn't do, right? That they wouldn't get it. And I got the exact opposite. They accepted me. They thanked me for my willingness to share and my willingness to step forward. I felt that kind of for the first time in my life, right? It was like this weight was lifted off. And then Joanna and I got to experience that when I did my full disclosure. I got to actually experience her accepting me, knowing it all, which was the scariest part. But so different for me when that happened, right? Was like, oh, wow, this is what I've always been wanting, what I've always been scared of not having, but I've kept from myself. And I think that's the really key thing, is what am I keeping from myself? And then what damage is happening to the person that I care about by holding on to this information, right? And we normalize that, like, yes, shame is going to want to make you hide. But shame is like any type of negative behavior. It's also going to create death. So you can do it and it makes sense, but you have to reckon with the death, right? The pain that it's causing in your life and others.
Yeah. And I think it can be tempting, right, to talk about that feeling unsafe when I share and I'm honest because of someone else's reaction. And this is for all of us. But realizing the lack of safety is not in the response, it's in my lack of self-identity and secure self-identity. Because if their reaction of pain to something I'm sharing, that a way that I've hurt them makes me feel unsafe, it's because I'm not secure in who I am. And so it's more of an internal issue with me than an external safety issue, if that kind of makes sense, which, again, the shame would kind of highlight that that's the reality, right? If I have a lot of internalized shame, I don't have a very secure identity. And I think that's where it is so challenging for couples, right? Because you have an addict without a secure identity with a lot of shame that goes, okay, if I'm honest about this, it will hurt this person. And I know it will. And their reaction is going to further break down my identity that's already insecure. I already believe that maybe I'm worthless or I'm a failure. And when they react in that way that they probably will react, it's just going to confirm that. And I don't want that. That's scary for me. So I'm going to run away from that. And so does that kind of make sense? And but that's why they'll then get stuck in that cycle of deception, of hiding, and kind of double down on it, even when confronted very often. Yeah.
What would you guys say, what do most people get wrong in this process of rebuilding after betrayal? Are there any kind of common mistakes that couples make?
There are. One of the interesting mistakes that couples make is they make it about the relationship too early. Early recovery is really about the healing of two traumas. When you have a sex addict, you have a trauma, right? There is some type of trauma, some type of experience that's gone on in the addict's past, which has caused them to want to manifest and cope, right? And try to, make it go away. And that's what the pornography or the sexual addiction really becomes, is this manifestation of trying to end pain. And so I've got this trauma that I've got to heal. Well, now my spouse has trauma from the betrayal itself. And so what a lot of couples think is, well, if we heal our relationship, then our trauma will go away, right? I'll have you, you'll have me, and none of our trauma will be there. And that's just not how it works. Relational security helps in the trauma healing process, but it's not a kind of save all for that. And so what a lot of times couples will try to do is they'll try to think about everything relationally rather than individually. We've helped couples by saying, let's deal with the individual issues first, right? So I've got my addiction and I have the underlying trauma that is causing it. That's the work that is the single most important thing for me to do early. For the partner, I have this betrayal trauma. I have a totally uprooted sense of my life. Everything that I thought was something is now not. I'm going to have to really reckon with that pain and what that's going to cause in me, right? What that's going to want to manifest. And if I don't do that, right, if I just worry about his recovery, because that's something a lot of partners will do, is they'll feel unsafe. And so they'll make sure he goes to a meeting, make sure he checks in, make sure he does, right? And if she starts getting in his recovery, or he starts worrying about how she's feeling, they're going to get stuck. And that's what we see a lot of times. We'll get couples who've been in recovery sometimes 3 or 4 years, and they've been doing this dance of trying to heal the relationship first and haven't actually done the work of healing the individuals.
What does that look like in terms of the individual, for the man and for the woman? What does that look like?
For me, it was about integrity. So pornography was damaging to me and the things I cared about because of how distant it was from my sense of values, right? One of my core values was caring for people. And pornography wasn't doing that. It wasn't caring for Joanna, because it was breaking the commitments and the vows that we made, the commitment I made for her to be my one and only, right? It was breaking that vow, but it was also hurting me, right? It was causing me to warp my sense of kind of sexuality and the body. It created in me a lot of like body shame. And so all of these things. And so I was recognizing my actions and my values weren't lining up. And so really recovery was about those things, which is great because that actually made life better. I think a lot of people see recovery, especially from addiction, as like, this is the penance that I get for the wrong that I've done and for the mess I've become. And if that's your recovery, you will resent it and you'll give it up eventually. Recovery really should feel like salvation, right? It should feel like I was stuck in a dark pit and someone finally pulled me out. And so I got that from when my actions and my values started aligning more consistently. It's not perfect, right? But more consistently. And I started to feel like myself again. And I started to really, for me, I think what was so helpful was to kind of see it as how dangerous what I was doing was. I mean, I was in an old school sex addicts group. So they were like, if you do this, it will kill you. And there were people there who were court assigned, right? It was a full-fledged group of people whose lives have been imploded from this stuff. And so there was no kind of like, yeah, I should maybe stop one day. It was, has to end now. And the life that I got from that made it possible for me to then step back into the spaces that I had really abandoned in our relationship and deal with the impact. But I wouldn't be able to do that with that, because when I try to kind of operate in the spaces that I've hurt from my insecurities, that's when I'm defensive. That's when I'm usually wanting to point out how much I've changed. I'm wanting her to get over it. I'm impatient. So from the addict side, that's kind of what it looks like.
On the partner side, it really is healing from a trauma that you've experienced. And so starting to understand what happened to you, starting to process the impacts that has had on you. And for partners, the impacts are very widespread. And so thinking about physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, has it impacted me as a friend, as a mother, as a parent, right? Like all these different facets of your life get impacted by the experience of betrayal. And so starting to understand those, starting to process them, and then starting to heal from them, right? One of the things that trauma does in your brain is it kind of takes over and kind of it creates these reactions that you are not used to experiencing in your body. And it can be a really scary experience, right? There can be any little thing in your world, in your environment, that can bring up these trauma triggers, is what we call them. And basically what those things are doing is they're talking to your brain saying, hey, this reminds me of the worst experience that I've ever had in my entire life. And your body goes back to that memory and re-experiences it all over again. And that's really, really scary to have those popping up throughout the day for many women multiple times a day. And so learning what it looks like to heal and to feel more empowered when those come up. How do I calm? How do I ground? How do I regulate those moments? And then it also means learning to trust your gut again. I kind of mentioned that earlier. And that is true no matter what your story is, right? So for some women, they had the experience of sensing some things in their gut prior to discovery, right? Like something's not fitting, something's off. But what they do is they shove that down because they can't figure out what it is. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling. So they just invalidate or minimize or just shove it away. And so they've had this practice of invalidating themselves over and over and over again. And so now as the truth is coming out, they're realizing, oh, wait, my gut was right. There is this process of relearning, of trusting myself. For some women, they didn't have that gut sense. They thought everything was great. Everything was wonderful. Their spouse was so good at hiding and lying and deceiving, right? This doesn't mean that you missed something. It means that you're married to someone who is a master deceiver, right? And a lot of women want to think there must be something wrong with me, that I didn't have that gut sense, right? And so that is a different type of not trusting your gut. Why didn't my gut tell me anything, right? Why couldn't I sense something was off? That can be almost more scary in some ways, because as we're healing and as we're starting to experience any kind of healthy, safe connection again, my brain is going to go, but that's what I thought I had before. And so how do I know this is any different? And so what's really interesting is for those women, trauma triggers can come actually when you're starting to do better, right? When you're starting to have fun again, all of a sudden your body's like, no, that feels so unsafe. That feels so vulnerable. And so learning, okay, based on my experience, my story, what is healing going to look like for me can be really helpful.
Wow.
And what's really cool is the process is almost identical. It's just different issues. And so we will often recommend, do you each have a therapist or a counselor or a coach, right? Someone who can hold that deep emotional space for you and help you kind of process what's happened, whether as an addict or a partner. Do you also have a community, right? Do I have a community of addicts and guys who get it and can understand my story and nod and go, yeah, absolutely. And for the partner, do you have a community of wives who've been through this, who can connect with you and help you feel seen and understood? Because you can't do that for each other early on. That is what's so hard. Is right. I would want to share with Joanna, and we'll talk about being honest and sharing, but I would want her to get it, right? And she'd kind of look at me and be like, I don't get it, right? And I'd be like, well, but it's so hard, right? Not to look at porn. And she'd be like, nope, not for me. I do it every day, right? And I would get so frustrated because I would be like, you don't understand me. Instead of recognizing like, yeah, she doesn't, because she doesn't have my experience. She wasn't exposed as a young age. She wasn't grown up in a culture that was overly sexual. She didn't have some of the same insecurities she didn't have the recipe that I had. But it was amazing because when I would go to my 12-step meeting, I could say those things and go, oh yeah, totally. Right. And that community was so helpful. So having counselors, having community, having sponsors or mentors, like people in your life who can walk through it with you, and then having some deep experiences, right, where healing takes place for intensives for both people are really important. And so what's cool is you can talk about that process, right? We can share with each other that process. Even though we're working through something really differently, we're in some ways kind of both doing the same work, right? We're kind of saying, hey, I've got this stuff that I've got to clean up if we want a really healthy future together.
I'd love to double click on this topic. This is one of the ones I really wanted to ask you guys about. This kind of when the two partners are coming from different places, different upbringings, one is maybe raised around a bunch of men and porn is normalized, and the other is like porn is awful, like why would you ever touch it? And there can be this lack of understanding. And what I've seen from a lot of the guys in my community, they come to this point where they're in their practice of recovery, and maybe they feel like their partner doesn't understand what the addiction is really like. And it's true, their partner might not understand. So I'm curious, how do you navigate that? Because to give a little context for this, one of the things that happens is like when a guy does betray and betrays trust and hides something and then gets discovered, oftentimes he might feel this sense of, I am such an awful person. I don't deserve to be understood, or I have to kind of to give in completely to any demand because I am a piece of crap and I need to just give everything my partner wants. But then if the partner doesn't necessarily understand how challenging it is to overcome this addiction, it kind of creates a really messy situation. So I'm curious, what is your guys' take on that messiness?
Yeah, it's tricky because I think those things are real, right? Those desires are real. I think it's it's two things. One, it's recognizing that as being part of a healthy relationship when it's appropriate in time, but also recognizing what makes a healthy relationship. And I think that one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have in general about relationships is relationships, especially marriage, is the place where I get cared for by my partner, when that's not actually the design. That's not actually what makes great relationships. What makes great relationships is when I learn to care for myself and I have enough to then care for the relationship, not my partner, actually, right? It's not my job to care for them. That would make me their parent, right? If I'm caring for them, I now take the parent role. And you don't have a lot of intimacy, or at least you should not, between parent and child, right? It's a different relationship. But I think people think they'll get to intimacy if, I take care of her. And then I turn around and go, okay, dear, I took care of you. Now you when are you going to take care of me? And eventually both of them will go, no, that doesn't work. And so it's about taking care of the relationship. Now, doing that part of taking care of the relationship does mean creating space and understanding of your partner's experiences, right? Their thoughts. And so we will talk about that, but we will also talk about if that's going to happen, then that's going to be led in a significant way by the betraying spouse, right? Justice and kind of healing demands that the betraying spouse would step in. And so we would say that for guys, right, we're talking about most guys in these situations, their role would be, I need to get to know the experience of a betrayed spouse. I need to get to know the experience of someone who came in believing something, right? Joanna had just beautiful vision of marriage and what it would mean because she came from a really strong marriage. Her parents to this day have an incredible marriage and they're super fun to watch in their 70s at how close and cute they are. And she had this vision, right? She brought that in and then had it ripped away from her. Right. On the day that I was getting free, right, she was just getting compounded with grief and reality and loss. And so for me to kind of walk in and go, hey, do you know how hard this is for me? And kind of expect her to do that first is that's just not right. Right. So instead I recognized, oh, I can heal myself so that I can create space for her to share her experience. And I can make it a point on my own to learn about her experience, to really understand the experience of a betrayed spouse. And then what was interesting in doing so, it brought me not only closer to her, but it also helped me understand some of my own woundings as I started to hear stories of betrayed partners. Not that I'm a betrayed spouse, but I started to understand more of some of the things that felt wrong in my childhood, that didn't feel right, some of the bullying and the injustices that I faced. I started to realize some of those things were unhealed. And so getting to know her story was actually ultimately healing for me. Now, I want to be clear, this took me years. I mean, I tried the, hey, how about you understand me version of recovery. And she kind of was like, no, not yet, and I kind of kept trying it. And then she kind of pointed at me and said, do you want to get to know my experience? Do you really want to understand what I've been through? Are you actually open to that? And what's amazing is as I worked on doing that and found success in that, Joanna stepped into that space of understanding me really faithfully because she's been faithful to our relationship. And so that faithfulness was there. She was just waiting on my faithfulness to show up, right? As I became trustworthy and faithful, she realized it's safe again for me to step back in. And so I try to remind guys, like, it's not wrong to want it. But you got to know when you're wanting it, right? If I'm wanting it after I get my 30-day chip, that might be a little early, right? To expect it, right? Like, hey, look, I've been sober for 30 days and haven't had an affair. How about you understand my trauma, right? That's a lot to put on a partner.
Right. Yeah. I think I heard you talking on a podcast about how it kind of, you had been kind of wondering, like, when can we go back to when this is like off my record and I'm totally forgiven? And at some point you have to kind of say, well, I give up on ever being off my record. And as like the moment you do that, then it's like, okay, now we can start to actually work.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I found really interesting when exploring this topic of betrayal trauma was hearing about some of the research that when, someone experiences betrayal trauma, that can actually trigger similar kind of PTSD type responses similar to that of sexual assault. That like when a partner is betrayed, that they actually can have real PTSD, and that can actually trigger some empathy on the side of the addict, the betrayer, to kind of tap into, what my partner might be experiencing. Is that true, that this kind of like PTSD, is there some research around that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's very significant how high the percentages are in terms of partners who their body reacts with, yes, PTSD symptoms. It is a trauma that they experience. And that means intrusive thoughts. That means, right, we kind of talked about like those trauma triggers where your body it almost can feel like an out-of-body experience where you are shutting down, where you are depressed, where you are maybe enraged. I have partners who almost black out rage. They're like, I don't remember what I did and said, but I think it was pretty nasty. And they've never had any anger issues ever before that, right? And so that's how we know, like, this is a trauma that their body is reacting to. And it can be, right, if that partner, if their spouse decides to step into that place of understanding and learn about what it is like, it can lead to a lot of empathy. Unfortunately, on the other side, we see spouses who aren't interested in understanding their partner's experience and then look at them like they're going crazy, right? And even to the extent of, we call it reverse victim offender, where they'll play the victim and they'll point to their traumatized spouse as the perpetrator, right? Like, you're yelling at me, you're doing these terrible things, right? How can you do these things? And even projecting that to the people around them, which can turn into really, unfortunately, a lot of emotional, psychological abuse. And so, but the more both people can get educated around the impact it has on the betrayed spouse, the easier that healing process is going to be individually, but also for the relationship.
I think this is
Mm-hmm.
really important what Joanna is saying, because we see this a lot, and not intentionally. I think that I want to be really clear. It's an obvious reaction, right? I see someone getting very upset, right, getting very agitated, seeming to kind of start to see their life break down in some ways, and so it's obviously concerning. And we see this a lot because you'll have a betrayed spouse who is acting out of control and emotional in ways they never have before.
Or maybe it's not heightened emotion. Maybe it's really controlling behaviors, right? This kind of safety-seeking behavior of control. Oftentimes when the spouse isn't taking the recovery seriously, this will happen.
And then you have a kind of repentant addict, right? Who's saying, hey, I feel bad about what I've done. I know it's wrong. They're going to meetings, right? And so if you kind of put these two people up next to each other, the addict looks super responsible. The partner looks super irresponsible. And we'll hear from kids that'll be like, what's wrong with mom? We'll hear parents be like, we don't understand why she's so upset, right? And so it creates...
Even professionals, right? Even that addict's therapist or coach who doesn't know the partner, doesn't understand betrayal trauma, could even say like, well, it sounds like the issue is your wife, right? We will hear that because of a lack of understanding.
And that creates such a difficulty for the relationship to heal, because then they're getting pit against each other, even from the outside.
Yeah.
And we know that people have a lot of influence from those outside of them. And so that's why I think it is one of the best things that for our recovery, I think, was learning the partner's experience for me, because that then made so much more sense of what she was going through. It also helped me to hold boundaries and to speak up when people wanted to kind of look at Joanna's behaviors or look at other partners' behaviors and say, you see, this is wrong. She's so controlling. That's the issue. And I got to help educate them and be like, hey, you need to know something. And so I will coach a lot of the guys that I work with to talk with their parents, right? To be really clear if their parents are involved in their life and they're wanting to offer comments, right, about this spouse that they're seeing who's now acting inappropriately, to go, hey, you need to really understand. Because a lot of times, right, the people around us know very little. They'll know things like, we're having relational issues, right? That's usually the way that this gets. We're going through some things in our relationship. And so it's hard for them to kind of understand what's happening and to be really supportive. And that's part of being honest, right? The really foundation of a new relationship is being honest, which includes being honest with people outside of your marriage, making sure that the people in your life who are impacted by what's going on have some sense, right? Some reality, some clarity, even if they don't know all the details of what's really happening, so they can properly support you.
Wow. There's so many gems that I wish we had more time to explore, but I know we're kind of coming up on time, and there's two kind of questions I really wanted to ask you guys. So, Joanna, I guess I'll start with you. The first question is, what do you wish more men knew or understood about the experience of betrayal?
Yeah, I think so many things, but one, not just about the experience of betrayal, but I think that gets missed so often is that if your partner has stayed and is working on their healing and the healing of the relationship, that is a gift. That is a gift that a lot of men do not get. And the fact that they are there and they are working on it means that they see something they value in you. And because I think so often they focus on the pain of their partner and, like I said, those PTSD symptoms, and right, like, it's never going to be enough. She's still hurt. She hasn't forgiven and moved on, right? They focus on those things rather than the fact that she's even there and she's doing the work, and that she's being honest with you about what she needs and the things she needs to see and the boundaries and even the things she's not saying. Like, that is a huge gift, and that is her communicating, like, I am committed to this. I am committed to you. And I'm committed to your healing ultimately, right? Every partner I work with who is working on the relationship wants to see their husband free and thriving and healthy and healed, both for them, but also for the relationship they can create together. And so I think not to miss that truth in the midst of the chaos and the pain that recovery can be.
Matthew, what do you wish more partners knew about recovery from porn addiction?
What's interesting, they know a lot. They sometimes know more than the guys because they'll listen to the podcast and do the work. I think I would just want them to know that I think it's okay to have high expectations. One of the things that Joanna did for me was she saw what I was capable of. And
Mhm.
she wasn't afraid to remind me of that. Not in a harsh way, not in a judgmental way, in a really loving way. She was able to look me square in the eye and say, I know you, I know what you're capable of, and I know this isn't you. And I'm
Mm.
excited to see the you that's free of this. And so partners chose their husband for a reason. They're usually something that they like about them, something they see in them. And so I will sometimes just remind partners, this isn't your job, right? Your job isn't to boost the identity and self-confidence of your husband, but you can also see what he's capable of. You can hold him to that standard. That's okay. That's actually a loving thing to do, especially when you can do it from that sense of, I know who you are. I know what you're capable of. I know the great things you can and do right now. I'm excited to see what more and more looks like as you get further and further free in this process.
That's so beautiful. It, reminds me of the coaching work I do. It's like one of the core tenets of good coaching is to see the best in the person that you're working with, and that's where real transformation can come about. Is when you see their greatness and you see their potential, and you remind them of it. That is, in some ways, the most loving thing you can do is to say, "I know you can do better than this, and I'm excited to see the best version of you come out."
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah. Any final words of wisdom or messages you want to leave with the listeners for today?
I think just a reminder that this is not a short journey. This is a lifelong journey. I'm in recovery for the rest of my life. We're recovering for the rest of our marriage. And that's not a bad thing, right? It doesn't, there's no
Hinder
shame.
us.
You know,
It doesn't hold us back
it
at
doesn't
all.
hold us back, right? In fact,
Mhm.
it's a really celebration of what we love about us, that we're so dedicated to ourselves and to this relationship that we haven't stopped working on it. And
Mhm.
so I think like being in it for the long haul is a good thing. And so reminding people, like, if this is your new normal, right? If working on yourself and working on your relationship is your new normal, that's great. It's going to take some time, right? You've got a lot of habits that are hard to break. It's going to take some time to break them, and they'll still want to show up. So the work is worth it. I think the joy we get to see in couples who are different, right? Who have this different marriage. And I mean, we graduate couples all the time. And then 2 or 3 years later, we will hear from them. And
Mhm.
we were in San Diego about a year ago, and we were getting donuts, and one of my old clients walked by, and they stopped me, and they said, and he's standing there with his daughter and his wife just looks at me and says, I want to thank you because our life is so much better. It's better than we could ever dreamed. And I was just like, that was the greatest gift to our work that we could get, is just seeing people transform. And so if you're not there yet, I guarantee you that moment is there. It's out there waiting for you. It's worth it, and it's worth the work.
Think maybe the other thing is that, like, the goal is not perfection. Sometimes we feel like, oh, yep, that moment someday will be there. Everything will be glorious and perfect, and we'll never struggle again, right? But it's an ongoing process, right? That, like we said, we're in recovery the rest of our life because we don't have the perfect relationship. We still struggle from time to time. We get triggered and dysregulated with one another, right? And so learning, it's not about perfection, but it is about a deep layer of safety, of security, of trust, of health that you get to experience, and that brings so much thriving to you individually and relationally. And so I think sometimes like keeping that appropriate goal in mind can be helpful too, as you're doing the work and as you're growing and healing.
Yeah, it's a bumpy road, but it's the journey is kind of, you find joy in the journey, not the destination.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
for sure.
Wonderful. Well, I guess the last thing is, where can people find out more about, I mean, we haven't even talked about the book you guys wrote or all the work you guys do. So where can people find out about the work you guys do?
Absolutely. Yes. So the book, you mentioned that. So Building True Intimacy is a book we wrote with our colleague, Dan Drake, that really goes through the framework we walk couples through when they want this healing journey together. And so it's a triangle that is built from the bottom up: honesty, safety, trust, vulnerability, and intimacy. And it's really the process we found that creates kind of both that individual healing and that relational healing in a way that's really healthy for everyone. And so that book is there. Our website is the Raabsmithsteam.com. We're the only Raabsmiths in the world, so pretty easy to find us. And one thing we love providing resources for people. And we didn't talk much about, but early on in our journey, when we were working on that level of honesty in our own relationship, we did kind of a full therapeutic, full disclosure to reset the foundation of that honesty. But what was really important for us from day one was doing a regular structured check-in with each other. So even though we were doing a lot of individual work, we still had to relate as a couple, and we had to learn to relate in really healthy, safe ways. And so we've created a structured check-in for our clients. It's one that works kind of right away to maintain and help you learn how to create healthy, safe, balanced communication, connection, but one that we still use to this day in our relationship. And so it's just a great way to make sure you're caring for the health of your relationship daily. And so we'd love to provide that to people.
Yep.
It's Raabsmithsteam.com/free is where they can grab that as well.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely link that in the show notes along with all your other resources and all the websites. Matthew and Joanna, it's been great finally getting you on the podcast and chatting with you. And I imagine we'll want to do a round 2 later on sometime. So looking forward to having you guys back on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of Unhooked. We'll catch you guys on the next episode.